And to that piece of lieutenant that's always on his podcast, bashing us, yeah.
Tension on deck, and welcome to the Executive Perspective. I'm retired Inspector Ron Leyson. With me is my partner and co-host, retired Deputy Chief Rob LuKach. Welcome to today's show. We'll be talking about the New York City chokehold law, the Diaphragm law. But before we get into any of that, I just want to give everybody a quick update on what's going on with the Finest Unfiltered family, with Eric Dim and his son Derek. Fortunately, Derek had an MRI earlier this week, and it had shown that the tumor has grown and that the doctors recommended to Derek and Louisa that they take Derek out and set him up for hospice care. So thanks to the generosity of the Finest Unfiltered family, the law enforcement family, the Marine Corps family, just the world, $500,000 has been raised so far. And I say so far because the fight is not over. But they were able to establish a residence, which was a requirement for them to get Derek into hospice care. So they're in the stages of right now setting up a residence so that they can move Derek in for hospice care. So let's just continue to pray for a miracle. God does do miracles, so let's pray for a miracle here for Derek, and let's pray for solace for Eric, Louisa, and Derek's little sister Ellie also. Again, I want to thank Paul Manicone, his wife Chrissy. Paul's handle is Just Right PD, and his wife Chrissy, who set this GoFundMe up for Eric, who hesitantly agreed because he's such a humble person. But it got to the point where they were just being, devastated by the financial burdens of the medical care over the last year. I want to thank and give a shout out to Sue Edelman of the New York Post for an article that she did on Eric and Derek's plight, and also to Sean Hannity for making a post, not just retweeting or reposting an X post, putting out a post on X, sharing the link. I truly believe that after those two things happened, that we did have an influx of donations that are going to be able to help with their upcoming costs, continued costs of care, and now the fact that they have to establish a residence, because as everybody knows, Eric talks about it all the time on the podcast, that they were living in their RV, and then it came out last week that they were actually living out of their RV in close proximity to the hospital in order for Derek to get the care that he was getting. So I just want to thank everybody for the support, continued support. If you cannot support financially, that's fine. Repost, retweet, share on Facebook or whatever other platform you're on, the story, the GoFundMe link, and keep them in your prayers. Rob?
Yeah, just to reiterate exactly what you said, Ron. I mean, just want to thank everybody that's, donated, given, retweets, whatever they could do, prayers. I speak to Eric or communicate with him at least once a day. I mean, he's in good spirits. As you can tell, he's a strong Marine. He's holding his family together, and we continue to push for Derek and wish for his speedy recovery. So, let's just keep in the game here and just keep our prayers together. And I'm sure, things will come out when we pray together, right? Miracles do happen, and that's what we need right now. So, just like you said, thank you everybody for everything that you've done.
Yeah, definitely. So All right. Before we get into our main topic, a couple of things that are going on, a couple of articles that came out recently that we just want to touch on that are law enforcement. Again, we're not just going to talk about the NYPD. We'll talk about law enforcement. And one of the first things was an NYPD deputy inspector was arrested back in August of 2022, Deputy Inspector Paul Zangrillo, for DWI and leaving the scene of an accident, and then a litany of other charges that came up from the investigation. The article just came out because he was fired in December, 18 days shy of where he would have had a full 20-year pension. Although his criminal case is still pending, he did have a department trial, was found guilty, and was terminated by Police Commissioner Tisch.
Yeah, apparently he was at a bar drinking. I think it was him and his wife or his girlfriend, and they ended up, leaving. He actually lets her drive the car. They're driving up in Manhattan. They end up hitting into a yellow cab. I believe that he ends up switching after they leave the scene. He ends up switching seats with her, and he becomes now the driver. The cabbie actually ends up catching up to them, confronts them. I think there's an offer of money for the damages, but the cabbie doesn't buy that. He flags down a police officer, and the deputy inspector ends up getting arrested. What was really bad about the whole thing is they talk about in the article that the DI also calls the bar and asks them to erase any video they have of him actually drinking inside the bar, which the bar does comply. But when the Internal Affairs Bureau does the investigation, they're actually able to get the video and to see that, yes, in fact, he was in this bar and drinking. I think the worst thing about this is we talk about, drinking and driving. I mean, you talk about the DEA, right? When there was the president of DEA was on, the DEA was on. He talked about that new ride program that they were able to get.
Right.
There was most recently there was another one. There was an off-duty fireman who ended up killing somebody that worked in LaGuardia, one of the baggage handlers. So alcohol still seems to be somewhat of a problem, but you need to understand that when you do drink, don't drive, right? That's the biggest. Leave that car there, whatever, and take an Uber. Ubers are all over. I used to go back to the precinct. If you're really that bad, get a ride back to the precinct and sleep at the precinct. I mean, there's no reason to be driving, especially while you're drunk. It could be the worst thing that ever happens, because here you think about this individual, this deputy inspector gets fired days before he reaches his 20th. So what does that mean? Ron, you know what that means, right? What happens if you get fired before your 20th? You end up losing everything. So he literally that DWI, that arrest, what he did cost him probably $2 million.
I agree with you there that it cost him his pension, and there's different sides to this to discuss, and we could discuss it. There's the DWI side where absolutely don't get behind the wheel and drive. It's not just about losing your pension. It's not losing your job. It's about you could possibly be losing your life. This was about possibly killing other people, maiming other people, and not just ruining your life, but ruining the life of so many other people, which is the possibility. On the other side of it, I believe there was a lot more to this. That I think that the officers that initially were flagged by the cab driver let the inspector go. Then IEB winds up getting involved. He lies to them. He tells them, again, this is all alleged in what I read in the paper, that he tells them he's home. They go to the house to do a fitness for duty inspection on him. He's not there. They track him down to the girlfriend's house. That's where they find him. He winds up getting arrested after the fact. Again, he lies. He lets her drive the car. She's, the video. So you have tampering with evidence because he called up and asked them to delete the video, but then they were able to retrieve the video because the bar in the morning did actually, delete the video, but they were able to retrieve the video because we all know there's a digital footprint everywhere. So there was as Patrick Donahue is saying, it wasn't an alcohol problem. This was a poor decision-making problem on multiple fronts. So it's alcohol, absolutely, because alcohol is what precipitated the poor judgment. And I personally think that if you're going to make that many bad judgment calls, I don't know what kind of judgment calls you're making, and I don't want to blame it on the alcohol. He was drinking. He let her get behind the wheel, and according to the newspaper, she was drinking more than him.
Yeah.
And so, right there is a horrible decision. And that's decision number one. Let's go play with my police car, and that's just a horrible decision. She gets into a little wreck, a little accident where the cab driver, complains of neck and back pain, but obviously the cars are both not immobilized because, he chased them down and caught up with them at a red light. And then it's just snowballed. And then like we always say, the cover up is always worse than the crime, right? Because how many people do we know that are actually terminated because of a DWI? Not many. In this case, maybe because, he's a deputy inspector. Executives are held to a higher standard. The use of the police department's car. But there are other avenues. He could have been demoted, not given a car. I know of an executive that had been involved in an alcohol-related incident, and they took his Category 1 car from him, and he never had another car again. And he had to travel to and from work. They transferred him to, gave him the shoestring transfer. And he had to use his own personal car until he wound up retiring. But it's poor decision making on all fronts. But I think not again to delve into that and to delve into alleged white shirt immunity or drone ranges coming up, is making the comment, if you're not an executive protected by Adams. There's total different conversations can be absolutely had. I think that the importance and the emphasis that we want to put on this is that drinking and driving not only could cost you and someone else your life, could not cost you or someone else tragic physical consequences from an accident, but financially ruin you with a legal case. And now here, again, get back to the discipline end. His criminal case is still ongoing. I guess the job found it so egregious because normally you don't have a department trial until after your criminal case has been adjudicated. And here his criminal case is still active and he was terminated. So I guess they found that it was so egregious that they wanted to terminate him before he got a pension, because once he hit his 20th anniversary, even with charges pending, he would have been able to retire. Not with a good guy letter, meaning that he's not going to be able to retire with the full benefits of police officer status as far as carrying a firearm and whatnot, but his pension would have been safe, because unless you're convicted of a felony while you're still active, your pension is safe once you pass your 20th year if you retire prior to that conviction. So I think that they wanted to ensure that he wasn't deserving of his pension due to the seriousness of all the allegations.
I don't want to, like you said, go into the white shirt. I mean, I somewhat agree with Joan Ranger, though, because you think about this, this case is 2 years old. Who was the police commissioner then? No action was taken then. Now you have a new police commissioner, right? So Jessica Tisch is here. Is she like setting the tone like, hey, there's a new sheriff in town, and now something like this happens, I'm going to take immediate action? And, she could have waited. She could have waited those days till he got, past his 20, but this was and even like you said, the charges and specifications, the trial room was not completed yet. So was this done to send, I think it was done to send
No.
a message.
The trial room, he got according to the article, he got a department trial. But normally you don't get a department trial prior to your criminal prosecution being done, because anything that comes up under a GO-15 is not admissible in court. So they don't even want to do the official interrogation because of problems it becomes with. That's why when we arrest somebody, before we interview them, we have to, confer with the integrity ADA if there's possible criminal, if there's even if we don't arrest someone, if we're looking at a case of possible criminality, we have to confer as duty captains, duty inspector, duty chief with the integrity ADA prior to questioning the member, because we don't want to interfere with the criminal case, which takes precedence. Here, he was giving his department trial while his criminal trial was going on, which is a very unusual stance. And again, like you said, is this a new stance that Commissioner Tisch is going to take because she wants to be so strong about integrity and so forth, especially holding executives accountable? Possible, and we won't really know until the next case. Hopefully there's not many more, if any, but I don't know.
I think it was more of the integrity that he went back and called up and made that call to erase the tapes. Not so much the DWI. I think it's more of the integrity. So I think, based on that maybe that's what her commitment was, to make sure that everybody. Not that there was a lot of integrity in the past administration. Obviously, we saw what the chief of department did and stuff. So, but maybe she's turning a leaf and making sure that things are done right in the NYPD at this time.
Possibly, but again, that's another discussion we could have. But I think the most important point for us here is an example of the consequences of such poor decisions when it comes to alcohol and getting behind the wheel of a car, where I guess, how do you say fortunately, but fortunately, the only thing he lost was his pension and not his life, his girlfriend's life, or some innocent civilian's life out in the street.
Yeah, I mean, if he had just taken, like we said, the hit for the DWI, he would have been still on the job, because
Right.
we know that. But
maybe demoted, whatever the case may be. But yeah. So another thing that came up in the news, it's been in the news recently, but it came out earlier this week, is the wildcat strike from the New York State Corrections Officers and Patrolmen's Benevolent Association, where they some walked off the job. The union saying it wasn't sanctioned, and they don't back the job action. And they had legitimate gripes, like a lot of people do. And even the city corrections officers have a lot of the same gripes, working excessive amount of hours, not knowing that you're even going to be stuck for overtime until you get there. So it's difficult to have that work-life balance, which is so important for your mental health. And they were working 24 hours. They would show up at work and get stuck for 24 hours. Now, you're there for your safety. You're there for the safety of the inmates. I don't understand how you could do a 24-hour shift. I can understand how firefighters can do a 24-hour shift in the hopes that they're not stuck at a large fire. But I don't know how corrections officers or police officers assigned to the jails could possibly do a 24-hour shift. The increase in assaults on the corrections officers, there's many reasons that they decided to walk off. The HOLT Act, which is the law that was passed for limiting solitary confinement of the prisoners, limiting reasons why you can do it, and limiting the time that you can keep them in solitary confinement. So there's a lot of reasons why they walked off. But do you want to? Yeah.
Yeah, so the HALT Act is the Human Alternatives to Long-Term Solitary Confinement Act. I think it was written into law in April of 2021. And it talks about they can't be in solitary confinement for more than 17 hours and a maximum of 15 days. And it gives them, they're saying that the inmates would have psychological and physical effects of prolonged isolation. Oh, did I just shed a tear? Yeah, no, come on. Are you really kidding me? We're going to enact a law that gives aid to the inmates, and we then, like you just said, we have corrections officers, state corrections officers, city corrections officers that are working 24 hours straight, right? And they have to maintain order in this jail while these inmates have no fear, because they know if I'm going into solitary confinement, I'm going to spend a minimal amount of time. I don't even have to be in there all that long. It's just going to lead to chaos. And I think that's what they were looking to do. They were looking to terminate some of that. And I believe that there was an agreement, according to the article that we read, there was an agreement between the governor, Hochul, and the union for the corrections officer. But I don't know if it wasn't sanctioned by the correction officer union. I don't know how there was like an agreement made. I'm kind of confused that way. And what exactly, because they still went up to Albany the other day, and there was over 1,000 people, corrections officer in Albany, issuing their point that it's unfair that they have to be subjected to this. So I'm not understanding what the agreement was. I didn't see what that agreement was, and I don't know if there was ratification by the union members.
There was concessions that were given. I mean, the union worked with the state to get concessions, even though they didn't sanction the job action. They're still working on behalf of their members, and the concessions that were given by the state to try and get everybody back to work came out late Thursday night. And basically, they said, "All right, for the next 30 days, instead of time and a half for overtime, we're going to give you 2.5 times, so 2.5." For every hour that you work for 30 days. They also were going to suspend the HALT Act for 90 days. Again, that's a law, but she could do an executive action to suspend the HALT Act for 90 days, and then they're going to reevaluate if the consequences against the inmates are too egregious. Now, as far as the HALT Act, with my opinion on the HALT Act, if they're egregious acts and they're put into solitary confinement, again, I have the same tier as you have. I don't know. I'm not that familiar with corrections. If they were putting people in solitary for minor infractions because they wanted to get even with them or whatever the case may be. So if you toughened up the reasons why you put somebody into solitary, I can understand that. But to just say, oh, blanket, you can't do more than 15 days in solitary confinement out of a 60-day period. So a 60-day running clock, you can only be there 15 days. So if this guy assaults a corrections officer, gets put into solitary, they can't do more than 15 days in solitary, right? Out of 60. So he gets out and assaults a corrections officer. He can't go back into solitary because he knows he's maxed out on his time. So I understand their argument with that. But again, unfortunately, it's something that has to be litigated. It's like the topic that we're going to talk about today. It's a law that hinders the ability to do their job safely and professionally, safely more. But it's a law that you have to learn to work around because the law is there and it's going to be there. One of the other concessions was that if they did return before, I believe Sunday was the cutoff, there would be no discipline. There would be no discipline if they return to work. And also that they would set up a committee to study the staffing, because one of the other major complaints was that they're understaffed, which is not just in New York State, not in New York City. It's throughout the entire country where law enforcement, police, and also Department of Corrections are completely understaffed, and they had some 70-30 rule where they would keep them, and so that was suspended. So there were concessions that were made, and then the article comes out because they sent out a letter because of a contractual agreement that came up and was ratified in their last contract. So the letter that was sent out stated basically, if you don't show up back to work, you're considered that you quit.
Imagine what you just said, the concession was one of them, that they were going to establish a committee. They really need a committee to understand that they're overworking their corrections officers. I mean, it's ludicrous, you know. It's just, and I throw another wrench into the monkey here, because I say, what about the guys that, if I had my brother was in jail, and this animal was just put in solitary confinement because he shanked somebody, and then after he does his 15 days, he gets out, and now he goes and shanks my brother, and what happens? He doesn't get put back in jail. He doesn't put in solitary confinement, right? He's out now because he served his 15 days in his 60-day period, which is lunacy. So I mean, listen, my heart goes out to the corrections officers. Like you said, we want to be safe. I think we're going to talk about the safety of the NYPD. What are some of our laws that we're restricting our cops with? You know, that lunacy in itself. But for all the corrections officers, listen, I've been a union member since I was in the IBEW when I was younger. Then throughout my career, and yes, Mr. D, I am the chief from SOD, just so you know.
Chief No Cash.
Chief LuKach, no cash. If I cut your overtime, I apologize. I hope you're able to make that up your last year. But it's just these, you know, my heart goes with these corrections officers. Union member throughout the department, retired, you know, from the CEA, started with the PBA. So I'm a union guy. I was actually a delegate when I was in the IBEW. So you know, there you go. He was my training sergeant in SRG too. There you go. Excellent. So I listen, I believe in them. I want them to get what's right for them. And I think their safety is more of concern than the inmates. And right now it looks like it's totally the other way. And I think it's exactly how we can maybe talk about the diaphragm law, because the diaphragm law and the chokehold law seem to be the same thing, protecting the wrong people. Ron?
Yeah, the you know, the diaphragm law came into effect in New York, and that was, you know, in 2020. It changed the way we have to take people into custody, and it just is another. It's part of the whole police reform movement, anti-police rhetoric. It's something. It's one more thing that's tying the hands of the police and making it more and more difficult to do your job. Not only is it just making it more and more difficult to do your job, but it's making it more and more difficult to do your job with the threat of actually being arrested hanging over your head when you go out there and you're squaring off on somebody. When you're out there and you have to take police action, you have to be in command. You have to be in charge of the situation. You have to take charge. And if you're going to have to take somebody's liberties away from them by placing them under arrest, it doesn't always go well. And as we see in video after video after video, police work doesn't always look pretty also. But taking away the ability to take somebody into custody by limiting what part of the body you're allowed to control, to me, is just something that it makes absolutely no sense. So I'm going to read the law real quick, the New York City Local Law 66.
Can we just go to where it started, right? I just wanted to bring up the, you know, picture of Eric Gardner, right? That was one of the first things with Daniel Pantaleo, where he was trying to arrest somebody for Lucy cigarettes, right? At the direction of the chief of department at the time. That's no mistake there. And he gets into a tussle with Eric. Eric doesn't want to give, and they end up tussling on the ground. And unfortunately, Eric passed away. So also with George Floyd, another incident where the individual was being arrested by Derek Chauvin, I think is the correct saying. And he literally, I don't know whether or not it was procedural or not in the Minneapolis Police Department, but he held him down with his knee, and apparently his knee was on his shoulder, wasn't on his neck, and he just held him down. But he was in a position where it impinged his breathing, and he also passed away. And there was some autopsy results of drugs being involved and everything else. But that sparked the whole thing, which kind of led into the law, Ron, which you had researched, right? That's how it all kind of spiraled up, and how it led into where then the city council and later on the New York State Assembly and Senate put together.
Yeah. So just reading local law 66 of 2020, it just basically says that the administrative code is going to be amended, that it's unlawful methods of restraint. No person shall restrain an individual in a manner that restricts the flow of air or blood by compressing the windpipe or the carotid arteries on each side of the neck, basically a chokehold, or sitting, kneeling, or standing on the chest or back in a manner that compresses the diaphragm in the course of effecting or attempting to effect an arrest. Penalties of this violation is a misdemeanor, and also any penalty resulting from the violation of subdivision of this section shall not limit or preclude any cause of action available to any person or entity injured or aggrieved by such violation. What does that mean? That means they can sue you too. Not just you can get arrested, but you're going to be civilly liable. So when you're looking at this and you see no chokehold in the fancy legalese of compressing the windpipe carotid arteries each side of the neck, it's a chokehold. Chokeholds have been banned in the NYPD since Francis Lavoti in the 80s, right? So that's been a banned use of force by the NYPD. We can get into the fact of, well, it's banned, but when you're fighting for your life, you do what you got to do. You do what you have to do. And when I was a young cop, when you were a young cop, Rob, we were told what? I'd rather be tried by 12 than carried by 6, right? So, which means I'd rather do what I need to do to protect my life so I'm not killed, and then have to worry about going in front of a jury and defending my actions and why I did what I had to do to save my own life. Now, there is an affirmative defense to this. An affirmative defense could be self-defense. So in the extreme case where you try to say, well, it's either I grabbed him in a chokehold or I was going to die, and we'll bring up examples. But the part that is really restrictive, to use maybe a poor choice of words, but it's restrictive for the members of the service trying to effect an arrest, is the fact that you cannot sit, kneel, or stand on the chest or back in a manner that compresses the diaphragm in the course of effecting or attempting to effect the arrest. How do you control someone's torso? Right? It's hard enough to control someone's head, right? Because if you control the head, you control the body. That's a known fact. If you control the head, you control the body. How do you control the head without putting him in a headlock? So that's your number one difficulty, right? Your number two difficulty is, how do I control your torso? If I can get you on the ground, which is a difficult enough task with somebody, and people always say, wow, why does it always take so many cops? How many real fights have people been in where someone doesn't want to go to jail? and they're going to do what they have to do to get away from the police so they don't have to go to jail. Believe me, sometimes it takes a lot of cops to get somebody down. I'm not into the dog pile method, but once you get them on the ground, in order to control them, it's very difficult to do without controlling the torso. And when someone's squirming and twisting and turning, you can't really, it's very difficult to control just the shoulder, so I'm not pressing on the diaphragm.
Yeah, so I think so that was basically the New York City law, right? Then eventually later on, I think in June of 2020, the actual New York State penal law changed and put a restriction on chokeholds that was statewide, because I think the law you just spoke about was that was a New York City local law, right? So then there was a restriction in the penal law where it talked about aggravated strangulation.
Yeah.
And that was when a police officer, right? It had a specific mention of a police officer,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
it also it doesn't talk about your culpability. Nowhere in that law did it mention whether it had to be intentionally, recklessly, knowingly. So anytime you put a chokehold on somebody in the state, right, you as a police officer, you were immediately subjected to a violation of that particular crime. So I mean, it's
Yeah.
putting major restrictions on us.
100%. And the New York State Penal Law 121-13A is the actual reference, and it reads under the law, a person is guilty of aggravated strangulation when being a police officer or a peace officer. There you go. So this subdivision is just for us. He or she uses a chokehold or similar restraint that applies pressure to the throat or windpipe of a person in a manner that may hinder the breathing and reduce the intake of the air and thereby cause serious physical injury or death to that person. And then they define it. And we know what serious physical injury, right? Serious physical injury is an injury that causes substantial risk of death. Well, they're going to say in court when they want to prosecute you as well, if you're putting somebody in chokehold, you're creating a substantial risk of death, because if you choke them out like people do in jiu-jitsu every single day with no permanent damage, you're putting them in a substantial risk of death, or which causes death or serious or protracted disfigurement, protracted impairment of health, protracted loss of impairment of function of any bodily organ, blah, blah, blah. So that's where it comes in again, like you said. So now the city is more restrictive. The state is a felony if you choke somebody out and you cause an injury, right? Or a substantial risk of a serious physical injury. So yeah, so you have it on the state level, chokehold, city level, chokehold, and diaphragm. And diaphragm.
Here's another thing, another caveat I would throw in there. So you have the strangulation law statewide, covers everybody, 5 boroughs, all the other counties.
Correct.
The local law, the diaphragm law, covers New York City, the 5 boroughs. State police come down, and they're in the city now. There's a troop, NYC, in the city of state police. If their training doesn't tell them, it may tell them to put their knee on somebody's back. You realize that then they're violating New York City law and could be subjected to that misdemeanor. And their training clearly states throughout the rest of the state that they're allowed to do that. And it doesn't fall for Nassau, and it doesn't fall just for state police. If Nassau comes over the line, Suffolk on a car pursuit, Westchester County PD, Jersey PD, anybody, right? So it talks about, restrictions again on us, but where was the training, right? Where was what we were supposed to be doing, right? What did they do for the officers?
Yeah. So again, they tell you what you can't do, but they never seem to tell us what we can do. So they tell you you can't do this, and then the NYPD, I'm going to go a little out of order. The NYPD puts out a video giving instructions on takedown techniques. Number 7. And they'd show us, these are videos that we had to watch on the computer, right? We all had to log on to the computer and watch these videos and watch these techniques and then get cycled through some type of training. Now, I was an executive when all this was going on. I was never trained in that technique in a physical component of training in any way, shape, or form. And I don't know if anybody in the chat can tell us maybe if they were brought in for any kind of remedial training or in-service training, as we used to call it, and were trained in these techniques. But we'll there's a video that's out that shows what the NYPD was telling us you can and can't do. Let's take a look.
After initiating a takedown of the subject, I cannot kneel on the subject's back.
New NYPD training video clearly shows officers what they can and cannot do when taking a suspect into custody. But sometimes that training does not translate in real life, including what happened last month in Rockaway Beach.
Yo, stop talking to bro.
There's already a law on the books banning officers from putting people in chokeholds, but the city council wants to take things a step further, banning officers from applying pressure or restricting a suspect's diaphragm.
It is tough right now to be a police officer. You have to worry if someone who may have taken a shot at you, that you are now arresting. If your knee hits their back, you become the criminal.
Chief of the department, Terrence Monahan, says these new rules have his officers fighting crime with their hands tied behind their backs. To put it all in perspective, Pix 11 turned to law enforcement experts, a retired NYPD sergeant and detective.
We're actually giving them a script on how they should behave in a critical incident, and that's just not reasonable. The city council are not police experts. They're not experts in police tactics.
But ER doctor Tamara Moy says tactics should not put anyone's life at risk.
If you are going to have to do physical restraint, we just have to make sure that we're applying, the least force possible in order to control the situation.
And with several major organs in the chest, any pressure could be fatal.
The chest is definitely an area where multiple serious and even lethal injuries can occur, especially if too much force is applied.
Even so, the NYPD argues every encounter is different, and a blanket law is not the answer.
There is no textbook on taking a person into custody. I've had many guys bigger than me. I said, "You're under arrest." They turned around, they put their hands behind their back. And I've had other guys who told me they were going to whip my so-and-so. And we got into it and we did our little tango.
Now, that tango the retired detective is talking about will look very different under this new rule. Another question the NYPD is asking is, what about performing CPR, applying pressure then? The doctor says that's a total different story. CPR is always used to save a life. For now, we're live in Lower Manhattan. Nicole Johnson, Pix 11 News.
Ron, Dr. Moyce. I asked Dr. Moyce how many people did she ever arrest, right? Stephen S. in the chat spoke about, resisting arrest. It is ugly. No matter what, it's going to get ugly. Mr. D talked about it. The NYPD just covering their ass. 100%. That's all I see. Don't do this. Don't do that, because what's going to happen? We're going to get sued. That's it. You have the chief of department at the time telling you that it's rough, but was anybody doing anything at that time? No. And I just reiterate that doctor. I mean, come on. I understand. You understand. Put a blue uniform on and go out there and tell me somebody's gonna comply with what you ask them to do. And when they don't, what are you gonna do?
Exactly. And what she said was, when you do have to use force, use the minimum amount of force necessary to affect the arrest or take the person into custody. Well, that's nothing new. That's been our mantra forever. Use the least amount of force necessary. But when somebody is violently resisting, it escalates the amount of force that you have to use. And you have to have tools and able to do it. That's why we carry a gun belt. And on that gun belt is not just a gun, right? There's pepper spray. The cops today carry an ASP. We used to have batons or PR-24s, all these different things. Pat, don't start talking about slappers, all right? But, you know, we have to use the minimum amount of force necessary. But not having the ability to put pressure on somebody's torso places you at such a tactical disadvantage. Look at those videos. That's great. When you have a cop in civilian clothes laying on the floor, allowing you to take one shoulder and one arm and your partner take the other shoulder and the other arm and put you into handcuffs, that's wonderful. And then you see the video that happened in the Rockaways on the pier, on the boardwalk, where he was, I believe he was like 18 or 19 years old, was violently resisting, and those officers had to take him down because, of course, they only showed that one little portion of the video. But then when the long version of the video came out, people had a little bit of a different opinion of it. But that officer wound up being suspended because of violation of the diaphragm rule, right? So, again, police work doesn't look pretty. And they had to put pressure on that person's torso, i.e., pressure on the diaphragm, in order to control him, in order to take him into custody. And all those videos that they showed don't show a violent perpetrator who doesn't want to be arrested. So, you know, Henner Gracie is a jiu-jitsu expert, and Henner Gracie he breakdowns videos on his YouTube channel. He also offered help with the NYPD. And there's a video that he put out and talks very specifically about what we're talking about right now. He breaks down a video of an officer who's struggling to take somebody into custody. So
I think.
Yeah, go ahead.
Go ahead. Did you have another video, right? Of the actual, there was where a cop got shot, right? Or there was a shooting where they tried to take somebody down, and it got real ugly fast. I don't think they weren't, I think they were a little, in my opinion, a little hesitant in the beginning because they weren't ready to grab him. And it looked like there was enough cops there at that particular scene. So I think that was a clear lack of training. In that video, right, you actually see the actual the shooting go down. I think there was body-worn camera that they reviewed. It was really horrific the way it all went down. The perpetrator was actually able to get the gun from the individual, from the police officer.
Yeah.
Don't make this hard. Don't make this harder than it has to be.
We can't step out. Okay? All right. So don't grab. Let me no, we don't put your hands by your back. I got you.
So those shots that you're hearing fired are the perpetrator firing the MOS's gun.
Right.
So those officers tried to take this guy down, and somehow he got the gun unholstered and started letting rounds go. And the scene got a little crazy after that. But not to break down the whole video, but to your point is there's a lot that could happen. And that was an extreme where they were unable to control this individual. He wasn't going to jail. I agree with you. You watched the whole video. They knew he was getting arrested from the beginning, and they waited. And they had multiple officers on the scene and a supervisor right there. And they didn't place him they let him stand there too long. And my instruction always was, once you make a determination that somebody's going to be arrested, get them into custody immediately, because don't give them time to formulate a plan. Don't give them time to realize, hey, I'm going to jail. Wait a second. And so I believe that was, again, like you said, lack of training. Part of it is lack of being decisive and getting that person, or attempting to get that person into custody immediately. And then the second half is, was there hesitancy because of the diaphragm law?
I think so. I mean, in the initial scene there, they're in the hallway, and they literally let him go back into his house, right, into his apartment. I mean, yeah, there's hesitant. I mean, they have enough personnel there, in my opinion. Do what you have to do, right? I mean, but I think there was definitely that they were hesitant. They didn't want to pull him down on the ground or whatever the case may be, but it led to him. It led to the perpetrator being able to grab one of the cops' guns, and terrible situation there. So yeah, and I'm sure there's other scenes where people are officers are hesitant, and it can cause danger for them. It's just the law in itself seems to make us step back, take a second look when, like you said earlier, in reality, hey, this guy's going to jail. That's it. That's it. Game on, and he's in cuffs, and that's where it ends, right? Once the guy's in cuffs, then it ends.
Right. And again, this was an extreme. This was an extreme where he was able to get the officer's gun. There's also situations where, again, on video, it doesn't look pretty, right? So officers are out there and they have to take people into custody. They're limited in how they can control the person's body, which may lead them to use other less than lethal force against the person, or possibly fear for their own safety because they were unable to take somebody into custody and control them enough that they may feel that they need to go to the ultimate, which is the use of deadly physical force, because they fear that their life is in danger. And I think there's a good example of that, of a video that Hannah Gracie broke down, if we could do that one.
NYPD officer gets eye gouged in the middle of a target and nobody helps. After the officer takes down the suspect, he nearly achieves the mount, his foot stuck in quarter guard, but the suspect pushes up on his face, eye gouges him, and rolls him right back over. Look at this. He pushes up with the left, reaches around, eye gouges with the right hand. Essentially, he's using the head control principle followed by the Kazushi principle as he twists the officer in the direction where he has no base points. And if you look closely here, you can clearly see the suspect's right hand digging into his eyes with the left hand pushing on the chin and mouth to create the twisting leverage. At this point, the officer throws a series of strikes with his right hand to make the suspect let go. In the absence of the distance control principle, the suspect is able to sit up from within the half guard and land several strikes of his own. You guys, we need to stop and take inventory here for a second. The suspect has eye gouged the officer, is punching him in the head on hard floor, and no one is stepping in to help. Because of the disastrously insufficient training officers receive, serious bodily injury is very likely in this situation. Consequently, this is normally the part of the video where the officer draws his firearm and utilizes deadly force. At that point, half the country defends the officer's actions, knowing he had to do whatever it took to stay alive, while the other half of the country condemns the officer's actions, stating that he should have been able to neutralize the threat with a lower level of force. And the irony of it all is that both sides would be correct, because the level of force used by an officer is almost always a function of the threat perceived by that officer. And threat perception, ladies and gentlemen, is directly correlated to the level of training of each officer. Simply put, better trained officers remain calmer in high stress situations and use lower levels of force than their untrained counterparts. Fortunately for America, this officer did not draw his firearm. From half guard, he reaches down, draws his pepper spray, and deploys it in the suspect's face. He then uses both of his legs to kick the suspect back, and then keeps control of the hoodie to facilitate his getup, a beautiful use of the tag-along principle. While maintaining an impressively calm demeanor, the officer sprays the suspect a few more times before holstering his canister and controlling the suspect by the hood. Even though we have no idea what it is, it's clear at this point that the suspect reaches inside his own underwear to hide something from the officer. And when the officer grabs that hand, the suspect turns around, grabs the officer's leg, and takes him down before the video cuts off. Even though it's very clear this officer has not provided sufficient training by his agency, he demonstrated extreme composure, and I want to commend
100%. I agree with Hannah Gracie that this officer did a phenomenal job protecting himself. point head control. But who had the head control? The perp. When they were on the ground, Henry Gracie pointed out specifically. I mean, he used all his jujitsu terminology and whatnot throughout that video because that's the audience that he's speaking to. But key to me there is that the perpetrator was able to roll over the officer using head control. Control the head, you control the body. And there, that officer was in a precarious situation. And just like the video said, what if he at that point felt his life was in danger? He's already been pounded on the ground. His head's been pounded. The perpetrator has his hand on his face and his throat. His weapon is exposed because his hands are holding on to the perpetrator. There's just so many different ways of things that could have went so wrong there.
It just amazes me that nobody helped. I mean, you can see that some of the comments, you know, this poor guy is right there, and nobody. All anybody wants to do now is get a video of the cop and them rolling on the ground. Nobody wants to even help the poor police officer, and clearly he used at the end he used his mace, right? So I mean, are there other options? Yeah, we have the mace, we have the taser. Sometimes they're hard to get to, especially when you're rolling on the ground, especially if you're in that close combat position where those two were, right, face to face. It's very hard to mace him until there's a distance between you because you don't want to impede your own actions by, you know, getting mace on you or whatever. So, I mean, it's very, very difficult. And I think there is a sincere amount of hesitation on the fact of police officers nowadays. It's just that they very fearful of committing that infraction, the chokehold or the diaphragm law, and it puts them at a severe disadvantage. So I think there was another video, right, where the teens are brawling with the police officer in transit. They're literally like flipping the cop around. The partner is attempting to take the individual into custody. They can't. The actual perpetrator has the officer in the chokehold. And I think at one point he literally pushes his head up against the gate to get into the system. So I mean, another scene where, you know, the perpetrator's allowed to do these types of actions, but the police officers aren't, and it clearly impedes, you know, the capability of the police officer to take that action.
This video surfaced of two 16-year-olds brutally brawling with two NYPD officers in the subway at 125th Street and Lexington Avenue in East Harlem. Police say the teenage boy flew into a rage after the officers asked them to leave the subway when they jumped the turnstile. Authorities say the teenage boy has two prior arrests, one for possession of a loaded gun, another for robbery last week.
Catch, release, repeat. This person was arrested for robbery a few days ago. Now he's back.
The prior charges against the teen are being handled in family court because of his age.
As soon as we catch them, the system releases them and they repeat the action. That is just, you know, that's when I say we're the laughing stock of the country. This is what I'm talking about.
The mayor wants bail laws re-examined regarding violent and repeat offenders.
So what do we do, right, Ron? I mean, here's it. What's the answer, right? So I think what happens is the NYPD, obviously they have to protect their officers, right? So it's either tell them don't do anything or maybe give them some sort of technique to do it. And we know that, you know, training is very, very, takes a long time in the NYPD to go through all the training because I don't think they really do it properly. They don't continually train. They don't refresh people. They just throw it out there like it was spoke about earlier in the chat. It's just to cover yourself. Mr. D said just to cover your ass, right? So that's all it is. But I think, you know, you're familiar with some of the jiu-jitsu type of training. I think there was something that the NYPD ended up coming up with.
Yeah. Listen, when I was younger, I trained in the martial arts, and I trained for many years. And I'm no Eric Dim, where I was out in Asia competing in martial arts and in jujitsu, and I took karate, and it was a little bit different. It was more of, hand to hand, where jujitsu is actually something that could be very effective in controlling your subjects using pressure points and different techniques in order to control the body. Like Henry Gracie said, you're controlling the head control, you can control the body. But again, now we are limited in that we cannot control the head, because then how do you control the head? Are you going to try and get a lock around the ears and the head and control the head without controlling without slipping down, and now you're in an area around the neck where you're going to be prosecuted for, restricting the blood flow of the carotid artery. So it's very difficult. And the thing is, with training, repetition, it takes repetition in order to be efficient and proficient in whatever you're training in. So,
you ever see this? You ever see the Seinfeld episode where Kramer does karate, or he calls it, and he says, "I'm at the same level as everybody else," and all the kids are like 6 years old, 7 years old.
yeah. But it's repetition, and it becomes muscle memory when you're doing these things, and you have to, someone, Hunter was talking about judo. Judo is effective. Judo is effective. Judo also you have to have the ability to take control of the person. There you go. I don't think that's
NYPD training right there.
I don't think that's an approved method in the NYPD. I don't think that the Civil Liberties Union would let you get away with that one.
That was from the police academy.
But it's repetition, and with judo, it's close quarters. It's controlling the person, with controlling their body, controlling their clothing, and moving them around, and things like that. Again, it's difficult. So what the job does is they actually take Henry Gracie up. From what I understand, they take Henry Gracie up on his offer, because in the end of that other video, he did make an offer to train the NYPD in the methods, in the jiu-jitsu methods, and also that officers in specific, if the NYPD didn't take up, that he offered training for that one officer to go to any of his classes. So, it's a thing in jiu-jitsu called the safe wrap. It's a safe wrap system. So this is what, again, if anybody out there has been a part of this training, if they're doing it, but this video is NYPD Police Academy gym instructors training in this method. And then they're saying in there, well, let's take a look.
Time training in the country for the NYPD. Officers are learning a specialized form of martial arts. And CBS News' Ali Bauman got a first look today at the course and explains why some people say it will make it safer to put a suspect in handcuffs.
Here, am I hurting you? No. Okay, can you breathe? Yes.
We're in the NYPD Police Academy as officers are learning how to train the future officers in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu.
Why train them in Jiu-Jitsu?
Jiu-Jitsu and wrestling are both sports that utilize minimal force to control a subject. So by using minimal force to control a subject, you prevent injuries to both the subject, the civilians, as well as the officers.
Let's roll in 3, 2, 1.
The NYPD has brought in world-renowned jiu-jitsu coach Henry Gracie to teach about 24 officers his new method for restraining a non-complying suspect, even if they're armed.
There's no joint lock, no pressure point, no chokehold, and no compression of the lungs or diaphragm. So it's the safest method of 2-on-1 restraint that has ever existed in law enforcement.
From Safe Wrap, I have full control of everything.
Gracie calls the method safe wrap the way he wraps the limbs while a suspect is on their side, as opposed to the conventional police method of holding someone with their chest to the ground.
There have been some restrictions put on the officers with diaphragm compression and compression to the neck. So we're trying to utilize different techniques that will not compromise anyone's breathing at all.
NYPD officers are banned from using chokeholds under the Eric Garner Anti-Chokehold Act, and yet the number of complaints against officers using chokeholds have steadily increased over the past 4 years, according to the department's watchdog agency. Trainers say this new method could make arrests safer for suspects and police.
And it's our hope that with the safe wrap system, cops will get better trained and more effective in their use of force, more reasonable in their use of force, so that over time we can repair the macro relationship between law enforcement and the communities they serve.
I mean, this seems like a brilliant solution to so many police encounters gone wrong. Will all the officers be trained with us?
Yeah, Jessica. So right now, some of the department's tactical trainers are going through the program, and the NYPD says the goal is to first train these officers, have them eventually start training the officers in the police academy, and then over the next few years, train some of the active duty members in the coming.
In the next few coming years. There you go. NYPD. In the next few years, we're going to try and teach these people. And in the article that goes along with that video, it's, one of the people in the training was actually an FBI agent that was training with the NYPD, because we do a lot of cross training with the other agencies. And the point of this 2-person takedown in the safe wrap is that everybody's trained in the same methods, because it's a 2-person, one at the top, one at the bottom, as you saw. And everybody's trained in the same method, so that any two officers can come together and use this method to take the person into custody. It's like training for an active shooter, where everybody goes and gets trained together so that anybody that responds could marry up and move in on an active shooter, because we know what the procedure is on that. Okay, but this training, he says he had 2 hours of training, and he was able to marry up with someone he never worked with before, an FBI agent, and they were able to effectively execute the safe wrap method. Once again, I'm going to say, and then I'll toss it to you, you're doing it with other members of the service in the gym that are not violently resisting, trying to avoid going to jail.
2 years before it's completed. Now, if you and I would train tomorrow, and then we're not going to get refreshed on anything that we learned 2 years from now, we're going to forget things. There's opportunities to train these guys every year, twice a year. Everybody goes to the range. Do a little bit more training up at the range, up at the height of buildings, okay? And that's so the height of building is a federal building up at the range. It's like a shoot house, but other agencies have that. So, you could take people offline and retrain them. If you look at the fire department, what they do is they take an engine company and a ladder company out of service for the day. They do it down here in Manatee County. You see fire trucks and battalion chiefs and ladder trucks all training. They're not responding to any jobs right away, right? They're not their first due, but they're training. We don't do that, right? All we do is we have our, once a time training, and you're good. You've gotten the certificate. You've got the check mark. Now go out and serve. And they never go back and reiterate what we need to learn. They never go back and look for things that we don't do, that we haven't trained properly on, or mistakes that we make when we do it, right? So you need that refreshing, and it just falls by the wayside. So, I mean, it's ridiculous that, you're going to do that and say we're 2 years out. Well, you shouldn't be, right? That should be done now. If you're talking about protecting your officers, and this is my perspective, if you're talking about protecting your officers, which you're supposed to do as a leader in the NYPD and as a leader in any other police organization, you protect your men and women who work for you so that they get home at night then you train them properly and you continually train them so that they never, ever do anything that either violates the law or can hurt themselves.
I couldn't agree with you anymore. I say it time and time again that we have to give them the skills, the knowledge, the skills, and the tools to go out and do their jobs effectively and safely. And we fall short. We definitely fall short on that. And I spoke earlier about the muscle memory, right? Muscle memory. They're saying a few years out, they hope to have everybody trained. So they'll train all the recruits that come through the academy, right? Where 10 to 15% are going to leave before they're done, and another 5 to 10% will leave before they're off probation. But you're going to train these people in the academy. They're probably going to get the most training on it in the academy because they have gym either every day. I don't know how often they have gym anymore or how many days a week they do the gym training. But I'm sure they're going to get more than the 2 hours of in-service training that these other people are probably going to wind up getting somehow. If they do, I don't know. But then now I go in the first group. Hey, rah, rah, rah. I'm going to go in, and these lieutenants that were trained by Henry Gracie to do this procedure teach me how to do it. I wrestle around on the ground. I work with somebody else. I get somebody in the safe wrap. I get it added to my CPI in my training section that I went and I was trained on this. This way, when I go out in the field and I don't use it, the job can say, but we trained them how to effectively take somebody into custody without placing any pressure on their diaphragm, right? Because that'll be the training. That'll be the defense. The defense is, well, we trained him to properly take somebody into a safe wrap position. And that's not the truth. Because, again, because I did it for 2 hours, and an hour of which I probably watched everybody else do it, or I listened to the instructor talk about it.
I think logistics finest right here. Perishable skill diminishes rapidly if not regularly used. Ironically, the more training that skill requires, the faster it diminishes if not used constantly. And you talk about, so they talked about on the video, and you just brought it up, they're going to train the rookies first. So I'm a rookie. I go out to the scene and I tell all my senior cops right there, guys, hold on, I'm going to take care of this. Now, you think, first of all, that's not going to happen. Any senior guy is going to be like, yo, rookie, get back down the bottom of the stairs. I don't even want to deal with you. But he's the one trained. Why aren't we training the cops that are out there now on patrol? Why aren't we training the senior guys that have spent their 20 years, their 15 years, their 10 years on patrol doing God's work? Why aren't they getting the first training? Why does it have to be given to the academy? Because it's easier? Because it's easier to put people in, because you have control of them in the academy? That's not what this is about. This is about training the NYPD members so they effectively do their job out in the street. Those guys aren't doing their job for 6 months, 8 months before they get out there. And then after that, if they go to impact zone or anywhere else.
Yeah, no, I wasn't saying that they're only going to train them. I'm just saying, like you said,
I wasn't going after you. I wasn't going after you with that. Yeah.
No, but what I'm saying is they'll be the easiest to train, the first to train logistically, because they do have control with them and they're in the gym. But they have to set up some type of in-service training. Now, do you add this to the training where you have different modules where when you go in and you get the training for the tourniquet and you have to re-up on that, right? You have to re-up on your tourniquet training, right? So then that was what? A 2-hour session, 3-hour session, you get the early blow. Okay, so instead of getting the early blow, maybe you do the tourniquet and then, hey, you got to come in gym clothes anyway, right? Let's go over to the gym and let's work on the safe wrap. But Patrick Donahue makes a good point also, again, as Patrick does. Add the following factors: alcohol, drugs, emotionally distressed person, right? Or emotional distress. Forget about an emotionally disturbed person, just emotional distress, fear of going to jail, and then the social media videographers apply all of that to making a safe wrap, not a controlled environment in a training situation. So
I could tell you another one, Ron. Excited delirium.
Oh, yeah.
A crazy thing where even ESU reevaluated their training on how to get somebody into custody. You know, it was 4 guys basically grabbing each limb and holding them down, and then waiting for a paramedic to actually come up and inject a tranquilizer into them so that they were able to calm down. Otherwise, it was almost completely impossible. And then you would put them into a wrap, and they would overheat also and die. So I mean, you talk about exactly what Patrick Donahue just said. There's many contributing factors. Yeah, when you're in the gym and you have a compliant instructor that's going to not really push up against you, so you get the technique down. That's not really helpful. But out in the field is real, you know, where it really counts. And I would also, like you had said, like tourniquet training, CPR training. Hey, at the range, there's two missed opportunities a year when you requalify that you could go to training too.
Yeah, there's several. And again, part of it is, well, I don't even want to say it because, well, I mean, we're low in manpower, so it's hard to take people offline to do training. But even when we were at our heights, we didn't do it. We did our in-service training, right? We remember the old borough-based training. We used to call boring-based training. We'd go and sit at the different boroughs and do training for a full day, whatever the case may be. Then we had in-service trainings. We had intact training, which was actually pretty good, where you go with your partner and you do some tactical scenarios at the different locations throughout the city. That was pretty good training. Where did that go? They didn't incorporate that into the TAC house that you're talking about, the Haida house at the range. Who goes through that? Specialty units. That's it. Right. Specialty units, not Officer Leyson and, you know, Officer Smith out there on patrol, going there and doing their thing. They're sitting in the room. They're getting, because they have them there, they're getting whatever legal training that the job needs to give them to keep them up to date on any changes. Then they take them out and they shoot their 50 rounds. And if they need remedial training, they'll get a little bit of remedial training that day. And if not, they'll lose their guns and have to come back for remedial training again. Minimal training twice a year if they go. Because what happens? Oh, I'm short on personnel. Don't go to the range. Don't worry about it. I know I notified you. Yeah, but I need you. So their training sergeant, you know, cancels you because we got a detail or something else is going on, and you wind up now I don't schedule myself in tactics, going into tactics and schedule yourself, right? I don't schedule myself for the rest of the cycle. So what happens? Now the boss comes to me and says, you got to go in the first 2 weeks or the first 3 weeks of the next cycle, and you have to go. And you could go a whole year without shooting your gun.
You know what they need to do? They need to teach people the different. You were an EMT, so you know the prone position, you know the recovery position. They need to teach everybody those positions, right? So when somebody's in a prone position, it puts pressure on their chest, no matter what, whether you're laying there or somebody's putting pressure on your back. There's pressure on your chest, your diaphragm, automatically while you're laying on the ground. So the easiest thing for any police officer to do once they're cuffed and taken into custody, I don't care if you put your knee on you can obviously, but you can put your knee on the back to gain control, get the person cuffed. Then you put them into the recovery position. So now that it allows them to breathe, right? Into the left recumbent, right? Move them over so that now they're able to breathe. That's all. I mean, there's quick little techniques that you can do that can save lives and not have to be restricted by these bullshit laws.
And I'm going to push back on Patrick on this one, where Patrick says the largest of the NYPD is a hindrance for in-service refresher training. To a point, yes. But now let's go back to who's your friend who was the training sergeant in SRG? Mr. D, right? Mr. D was the training sergeant, right? So we have training sergeants and they have training cops with them, right? In every precinct. There's a training sergeant and a training cop in every single precinct. What is their main goal? To make sure that we check the box and everybody gets
Sign the book.
Yeah, sign the book. Sign the book that you had this training. I'm going to come to roll call and I'm going to talk about this. I'm going to talk about that. I'm going to bring this up. This is mandatory EEO training and mandatory this training and mandatory that training and everything else. Why aren't we utilizing the resources that we have? The training or sergeant and training officer. And again, TC, I agree. Training cops are on patrol 4 days a week now because we're so short of personnel. But you know what? The priorities have to be made. And there's a lot of other people that are being taken care of within the station house. And that's been spoken about on John and Eric's show. And everybody is aware that there's a lot of people. And, you know, one of Eric Adams' big things when he was running for mayor was that he was going to, you know, get the cops back out on the street, hire civilians for those inside jobs and whatnot. I haven't seen it happen. But we hear that time and time again. But you know what? Your domestic violence people are supposedly untouchable, right? They have to do their domestic violence visits. They have to do this. They have to do that. They're not supposed to use them for patrol. I don't know if they're being used for patrol nowadays. They probably are, TC. You could probably chime in. I'm sure the domestic violence was always off limits to me. And the boss used to come to me, oh, can I use officer so-and-so, detective so-and-so? I'm really short. No, you can't. They got to go out. They got to get their visits. They got to make sure that these people are safe. So I say take these training sergeants, take the training cops, and utilize them. Because what are they doing for the majority of the day? Okay, they're giving desk relief. The desk sergeant, right? They're supposed to, you know, have a certain amount of time where they're giving them the desk a break or whatever the case may be. Take these, we have the resources. Train them, and then, you know what? Give the cops a training day in their own command and utilize them to train them in certain aspects that we talk about all the time.
I think you have to change the dynamic of the police department then, because their emphasis is like cover themselves rather than train their officers so they're better prepared and can work better, right? So I mean, absolutely, the training sergeant, give them the material, give them the means, whether it's mats or things like that they can do this type of training. You know, maybe that's the first step. Get all the training sergeants trained up in this, this safe rap, and then move on, because then at least somebody's there in your command. You have somebody has a quick question, says, Sarge, I missed something. I'm not familiar with it. All right, let me go over with you, because you can do it right there then, right? I think I spoke about it last time, similarly in ESU. If somebody in ESU is not working properly, they send them back down to Floyd Bennett Field, and they do another week of tactics. They sit with the tactics training officers and go through the whole program again. So, I mean, sometimes people need refreshers. It's not uncommon. And I think that's something that the police department should do. They don't do, right? They don't, I don't know if they necessarily care. I also want to just touch base on the sergeants. The sergeants on patrol, you really need to supervise. When you try not to get involved as much as you can, but watch the scene. When I was on a entry team, I wasn't the first one in. I wasn't the second one. I was all the way in the back of the stack because I needed to supervise. I need to know what they needed inside. Do I need to stop somebody from coming in the door? So the sergeants need to see what's going on so they can either A, save a cop from doing something that might not be right? If get your knee off that guy or whatever, and they can observe the whole operation. So it's just a little bit of tactics there. And then I'm a big advocate of mace and the taser. If you have the capability, I know people will argue with me that the taser is only 50% effective, but you know what? It is effective 50% of the time. So take the chance, right? If you can mace. And I know that there's a whole problem with the TRIs, the threat resistance injury reports, resistance reports. That's a pain in the neck too, because then you got to do that, and then you could get called downtown because you're using too much force. But the bottom line is you need to protect yourself, right? And I would hope that the sergeants, lieutenants, the captains, all the way up to the chiefs, they all protect their members first. I mean, you spoke about it last time, Ron, the alert training. How good was that alert training, right? The advanced law enforcement rapid response training, right? That was some of the best training that we've had in the
100%.
NYPD.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think that was actually the best training for the NYPD that I've ever had.
Right.
I've ever had, and I went as an executive because when I was the CO of the 110, we were one of the first units that we were one of the first places that was going to do a drill with ESU at the Queen Center Mall. So I was able to. I had a cop that used to work for me when I worked in Blast that was one of the lead instructors there, and I called him up and I said, "Listen, what can we do?" He goes, "Listen, we'll make a whole module for you." So I was able to bring like 13 people, and then there was other people that came in to fulfill the whole class. But I was able to get 13 slots, which is unheard of. So of course everybody wanted to go. All the guys wanted to go. All the crime guys, all this guys, all that guy. I said, "No, listen, who's going? The mall cops are going. The conditions cops are going. The cops that are going to actually be by the mall. All right, but absolutely 100% the best training. That was a 5-day training at the time. 5 days of training at the time, and so that was great training. I think that training is lacking 100%. I think that Samantha Cohen is saying that was it Samantha? Plainclothes training was great. Yeah, plainclothes training is good, and a lot of the plainclothes training is surrounding jujitsu also, and how to handle yourself in plainclothes and close quarter combat and whatnot. But I think that this diaphragm law has so many tentacles that get in the way of police officers being able to effectively do their job. I think we touched on a lot of them. There's the legal ramifications. These are just the things that cops are going out in the street that we didn't have to worry about in the days when we were on the street. When we were on the street, I didn't worry about leaning on somebody's back. I didn't worry about kneeling on somebody. Of course, one of the first things you did was you put your knee right between their shoulder blades to control their torso and able to get the handcuffs on. We didn't have to worry about those things. And these, among other things, are things that cops have to go out every day and they have to worry about and they have to think. And someone said it earlier, he who hesitates loses. And when we lose as the police, it's a big loss because that means that we're getting hurt, somebody else is getting hurt or worse, and the perpetrator is probably getting away.
Listen, there's laws in Ohio, the state police officers, they're permitted from putting somebody in a prone restraint. Nevada has laws, the same. California also. So it's not just us, it's throughout the country. So there needs to be, reform, back to reform these laws so that cops can do their job. I love what TC says, the best training is when your pension people tell you how to fill out your forms. Absolutely. But you know what? You got to get there, right? So let's get those cops to get there. I think this was really a good conversation. I think that it's important to the cops and the supervisors and the bosses to hear our perspective on this, because this is something that you can push for change. I know that there's political implications, but there could be a push for change. Or there should be definitely techniques so that cops are not put in a subjective position where they're end up getting arrested or put in God forbid put in jail for something that they're doing while they're working.
Yeah, and as executives, and this is the executive perspective, right? We talking about the law, we're talking about what cops are dealing with, and hopefully those that are listening understand that we do understand that. And when I was active, I did understand that. When you were active, you did understand that. And it's not, it's something that weighs heavy on us. And we have to try to figure out, how do we manage our personnel? How do we effectively get the job done? And how do we as executive expect our members, our subordinate members, to get the job done effectively and safely? I used to go to roll calls all the time, and I used to talk to the roll calls, and I used to tell them that, listen, number one, protect yourself and your partner tactically, right? Protect each other, right? Then I used to say, and protect yourself administratively. This job asks you, with the TRIs keep coming up, and now you have the stop reports for even car stops and everything else. Even when you're warned and admonished, you still got to do a stop report on car stops. Protect yourself administratively. The job is making you do it and mandating that you do it. Do it. Because if you don't do it and somebody makes a complaint because you stopped them, even if you gave them a warning and admonished, you wind up losing because you didn't do an administrative function. So protect yourself administratively. But towards the end, when I was leaving, and I used to go and talk to the roll calls after 2020, when all these things were coming into effect, I used to have to add things. And I used to have to say, you have to now, more than ever, protect your family and your pension and your freedom. So, of course, it's still, first and foremost, protect yourself and others tactically. Then administratively. But even before administratively, you kind of have to stick in now to protect yourself against all these things that are going against you. Because you see that they'll lock up and convict a cop for striking somebody who's violently resisting, and they said, okay, the first 4 strikes were good, but strikes 5 and 6 were excessive, so he was convicted of assault 3 and lost his job. Thankfully, the judge didn't put him in jail, because he could have went to jail for up to a year. Okay? This chokehold law, only 1 officer so far has been arrested and indicted under the chokehold law, but that case might have some exceptional circumstances surrounding it. We're not going to even get into it. I just wanted to mention that there's only been 1 officer so far, to my knowledge, that's actually been charged under this law. All the DAs all said, we're not going to charge anybody because city council put it into effect and we're not going to charge anybody. I don't believe that for a second. Just waiting. But as executives, we have to support our members in the best way possible. And sometimes I don't know how to do it. Sometimes I just don't know how to do it. I used to go down and talk to Eric and his team because they were hands down the best anti-crime team that I've ever worked with in over 30 years. And the way that they went out and were able to take illegal firearms off the street safely amazed me. And I used to talk to them all the time. And towards the end, I said, I don't know how you guys still go out there and do God's work with all these things up against you. But God bless you for doing it. But remember to keep yourselves safe. And the executives out there, you have to remember what they're up against. You can't be chasing numbers. You can't be chasing the carrot, looking for your promotion. We talked about this in a prior podcast. You have to support your members and understand that they have these restrictions. They can't do the job like you were able to do when you were a cop. The job has changed. The laws have changed. The sentiment of the public has changed.
I just want to touch real quick on, and then we can wrap it up, I think, right? I want to touch on Thomas Rossi. He says, unfortunately, only members who pursue specialty assignments, issue, highway, harbor, conditions, etc., actually take training seriously. And I'll tell you why. Because they have boss buy-in. every boss on this job should buy into this training and want to push their members to be trained. When I was in ESU, I came in quietly. I watched what they did. I understood what they did. And I said, anybody that needs additional training, I will support and we will go forward. And that's the problem. Like you said, when you were a CO, you brought those things in. You addressed roll call. You brought that training into it. Your thoughts. That was great. More bosses like yourself. We need more bosses that are going to push this down so that they understand the importance of it. Because otherwise, like you said, it's not about how many crimes. When am I going to get promoted? When am I going to get transferred to another command where I can get promoted? When I can get out of patrol? No, it's that. It's that you have to have the buy-in to the safety and training of the officers. To me, that is paramount.
1,000%. 1,000%. And we're going to have future episodes on leadership and supervision, especially in the frontline levels, and what we think people could do better, and just that whole topic. That's a great comment. But what I'm going to say is the reason that everybody needs to worry about tactics every single day is because majority of officers that are killed and injured in the line of duty aren't in specialty units. It's the cops in the radio cars that are responding to the routine jobs, right? The routine car stop, the routine domestic violence job, routine closed job where we just lost an officer, not the NYPD, but in another state. So everybody has to remember how important tactics are. And you have to do your job safely. And I think the main point behind this is that we understand that the restrictions placed on the NYPD, not only by the Criminal Justice Reform Act and all of the administrative things, but also on this diaphragm law and the chokehold law at the state level, has put such restrictions on the members out in the field to do their job safely. So I'm just praying for the safety of all the members that are out there, that you can do your job, that you can do your job safely, that you can sign out at the end of your tour. You can go home. I used to say it all the time. So you can go home to your wife, to your girlfriend, your boyfriend, your mother, your father, your Xbox, your dog, whatever you're going home to. The most important thing is being able to sign out at the end of your tour safely.
Absolutely. I mean, that's the bottom line, and that's what we're trying to, go through with this podcast. I mean, I appreciate everybody that was in the chat tonight. Great comments. Please, share and like so that we can continue this program and provide you with the executive perspective. Ron, do you want to wrap it up a little with maybe some more information about Eric or anything?
Yeah, I was just going to say in the description section in YouTube, I'm not sure about the other platforms, but in the description section of this podcast is the link for Derek's GoFundMe. Please don't look at the number and say they have enough, that they've got a lot of donations. It's never enough. It's never enough, especially now that they had to set up a residence. They had to get a place to live, furnish it. They're going to have to bring in specialty equipment in order to give comfort to Derek in these very trying and difficult times. For those who missed the very beginning of the show, Derek had an MRI earlier this week. The MRI showed that the tumor, unfortunately, is growing and not regressing. And he was suggested to Eric and Louisa that they take him home and place him in hospice, which is what they're doing. So they had to establish an actual residence outside of the RV where they've been living, and they're going to have to do a lot. So thank God and thank you to everybody out there that they were financially able to do it due to your donations because they did not have the means any longer themselves. So they were able to, thanks to the outpouring of help, thanks to Paul and Chrissy Manicone for starting this, and everybody else were able to establish this new residence so that they could take Derek out of the hospital and bring him home and start his hospice care to make him comfortable. So again, we ask that you can donate anything. Please do. If you can't, understandable, please, let's pray for a miracle for Derek. And with that, I say Eric was visibly not present today during an interview on the show, on the 805 show with John Macari. John will be back on Friday with Marlon and with Sal Greco. I don't know if Eric will be able to join them again because obviously he has a lot going on with his family and he has to take care of that. So he'll be away from the show for a little bit. But let's pray for them and for their strength and for Derek's strength. So with that, we'll see you next Wednesday, 5:05 p.m. on the Eastern Side. And be safe, everybody.
Take care.